I think we can all agree that when it comes to habits, setting them is the easy part, but maintaining them over the long term, that's a whole other ballgame. Life so often gets in the way and can make our habits feel really hard to maintain, or we've made mistakes in setting them that make them impossible to keep up with. Stick around because I'm going to dive into that a little bit more in this episode. This week, I'm going to give you the tools to set habits and actually maintain them over the long term. The catch, these tools aren't what you would initially think of when it comes to maintaining habits. I'm going to be pulling from a time when I actually threw a lot of my habits out the window and how taking this approach actually made them more sustainable long term. These tools will help take some of the pressure off and make your habits a much more easy thing to integrate into your life instead of something that you just grind through to check off a to-do list. So stay tuned. You don't want to miss this episode. Welcome to the Mindset Gym podcast, where we exercise your way of thinking to help unlock your hidden potential. I'm your host, Emily Irwin, a registered nurse and holistic nutritionist with a passion for all things health, fitness, and personal development. All right, let's get into it. Hey guys, welcome back to the Mindset Gym podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. I am so excited to dive into today's topic. If you are someone like me who consumes a lot of self-help content, I'm sure you've probably heard a lot of information out there when it comes to habits. You know, that it takes discipline, that it's not sexy, that it's something that you have to do repetitively until it becomes an automatic part of your day. We've heard about habit stacking and setting cues and checklists. You've heard all of these things. So today I'm going to be diving into some advice into how to set habits and maintain them over the long term, but it's not going to be the conventional kind of advice you typically hear. The idea for this episode actually came out of the last place that I expected to be thinking about habits, because it was a time where I completely took some of my habits off of my radar. I completely ignored them as a part of my day. I made the conscious effort to kind of take some of them out of my routine. The reason I did this was because I was recently in Japan for 2 weeks, and I knew going into the trip that my main focus for that trip needed to be just being present and taking in this experience for everything that it was. I didn't want to get caught up in trying to check off my to-do list and making my habits the main priority of my day, because that was not the priority. My priority was to just be present. And so I knew going into it that I was going to be taking a lot of my regular day-to-day habits off my radar. But a funny thing happened. The fact that I took them off my radar and took them out of a part of my day actually facilitated me jumping back into them when I got home, and kind of started to shift the way that I was thinking about them a little bit. And so I wanted to share some of this advice with you to help you take a little bit of a different approach, because I think we all do a really great job of setting habits and deciding what kind of habits we want to do. Where we tend to make the mistake is being able to maintain them over the long term. So the fact that I kind of dropped the reins with a lot of my habits was a really big deal going into this trip, because that's not something I have actually ever really done before. I'm typically someone who's very rigid with their habits and with their to-do lists, and I kind of form my day around checking off the things that I need to do. And so an example of this, it's been a little over 8 years since I started going to the gym consistently, and since then I have never missed a workout. Unless I've been extremely sick or there's been some reason that I absolutely can't. But when I go on vacation, I have typically planned my vacation around still being able to do that thing. I've bought day passes at various gyms, I've brought resistance bands, I've done bodyweight workouts, whatever. I have always found ways to continue to check all of the things off my to-do list while I've been on vacation. And I wanted to try and take a little bit of a different approach this time around, because the experiences that I was going to be having were not ones that I had the ability to do several times over. This was kind of a once-in-a-lifetime thing, and I did not want to spend my day getting caught up in my to-do list. So I didn't. So this time around, I dropped the reins. I kind of went into it with the mindset of, if you do any of these things on your checklist, if you just happen to be able to do them, great. But there's no pressure, there's no need. Don't build your day around it. Don't build your routine around it. Make your focus just being present and taking in the moment for what it is. Now, throughout the course of that trip, I did take some steps to just be mindful of my overall health and well-being, because we don't want to completely forget about our physical and mental well-being. So there was some smaller things that I did to still kind of be mindful of that, and I'll get into that a little bit later in the episode. But the funny thing is that dropping a lot of my habits for this period of time actually really helped me integrate them as I returned back home. And it got me thinking a lot more about having a more flexible approach and how that may be just the thing to make the habits not only sustainable but exciting and enjoyable to do long term. Because while I recognize that I'm someone who's typically really rigid and I often don't have a hard time sticking to my goals and doing all of these things because I just don't allow myself the space to not do it, there are a lot of people who struggle quite a bit with maintaining their habits long term and actually making it something that they enjoy integrating into their life. And so I thought that shifting my mindset into this kind of approach and sharing it with you guys would be really helpful to have you shift the way you're thinking about your habits and thinking about the way that you're showing up for them in order to make it a little bit easier for you to actually stick with them long term. I think all of us, we kind of fall into two main camps when it comes to sustaining habits. The first one is kind of the camp that I fall into, which is being really, really rigid and kind of taking the fun out of everything. Or you're in the camp where you struggle to find enjoyment or balance with the things that you're doing, and so you'll stick to it for short stints of time and then you just scrap the plan altogether because it's not enjoyable or there's been no consideration for how these habits are going to fit into your life long term. So today we're going to work through what I've identified as the top 5 things that you should do to actually maintain your habits and enjoy them long term. And these are not your typical conventional advice when it comes to habits. A lot of these things are not going to be the first couple of things that you'd think of when it comes to sustaining habits, but I think that these will actually be very helpful. So the first thing that I want to talk about is to treat your habits like your morning coffee, not your daily water. Let me explain. So what I mean by that is your morning coffee is a ritual. It's something that adds to your day. It's something that gives you value. It's something that you typically do automatically without giving a whole lot of thought to. But if you were to go and stay at a friend's house who didn't have coffee, or you were staying at a hotel that only had tea, you missing your morning coffee and having to adjust and do something a little bit different would not be the end of the world. It's something that is a pretty consistent staple in your day, but there is some space for flexibility. There's some space for you to change around what that is. Whereas drinking water throughout the day, that's a non-negotiable. No matter where you are, no matter what you're doing, you have to find some way to drink water throughout the day. You can't really go without doing that. That's kind of a necessity. So it, unlike your morning coffee, doesn't have that as much space for adaptability. It's something that no matter what is going on, you need to do. Instead of making your habit the thing that makes or breaks your day, make it something like your morning coffee. Make it something that adds to your day and something that you know gives you value and makes you feel good, but something that you have the ability to be flexible with. In addition to this, I want you to plan for things to not go the way that you want. Plan for there to be hiccups and decide how you want to approach your habit when you're in different situations, when you're in different circumstances, when life throws you some sort of curveball, because it inevitably will. That's just how things work. Circumstances change, life changes, things get busy, things get messy. So how are you adapting this habit to fit it into your day-to-day routine? You can't just make a habit and expect it to be the same thing day in and day out, and that's just going to work without any bumps in the road. That's not how life works, okay? Plan for adaptability, plan to be flexible, and treat it as something that is valuable and positive to your day, but something that's not the end of the world if you have to miss it. So I'll give you an example of this that we talked about earlier in the episode. Going to the gym has kind of been something I have treated like my daily water for the longest time. It has been something that has been mandatory. It has often made or broken the value of my day, or whether or not I was successful with my day if I checked this certain habit off. And so I really had to do a lot of work with myself before going into this trip, because I knew that me continuing to do that every single day the way that I typically had was just not going to be possible. Or if it was something that I did, it was going to take away from me just enjoying and being present in the moment, which is really what I wanted to do. So I really had to kind of have a talk with myself and say, this is okay. It is okay for you to have to adapt and change and show up a little bit differently in this way. And so recognizing that some sort of daily movement provides a lot of value, provides a lot of positivity, and really has an impact on how I feel, I still wanted to think about the ways in which I was going to be getting some sort of movement in, even if it's not exactly going to the gym and doing my typical workout for that day. So on this trip, it looked like a whole lot of walking. But just having that consideration for, this is a different circumstance. This is not my typical day-to-day. My ability to show up and do things exactly the way that I typically do is just not going to be there. So how am I adapting this habit? How am I being flexible with the way that I'm showing up in order to make it something that I'm still accomplishing, just in a little bit of a different way? So the second thing that I want you to do is I want you to pay attention to how your habits make you feel. Really pay attention. Don't just go through the motions. Don't just do the things because you know you need to check off a to-do list. Really take the time to be mindful of how you feel when you do and don't do these habits. The reason for this is because it adds a whole other layer of value to the things that you're doing. You're not just doing things because you think, oh, I should be doing this, or it's on my to-do list, or someone on TikTok said it was an important thing for me to do. No. Give yourself the time to really absorb what it is doing for the way that you feel. This was something that I noticed big time on this trip, because I am typically a little bit mindful of how I feel when I do my habits and the impact that it has on how I show up throughout my day-to-day. And so while I was on this trip, something that I wanted to just pay a little bit of attention to was how I felt mentally and physically when I didn't do them. Now, I want to make an important distinction here. I don't want you to be mindful of these things as a way to shame and blame yourself and tell yourself that, oh, I'm a failure because I didn't do this, or I don't feel good because I didn't do this and I suck because of that. This is not an opportunity for you to shame and blame yourself. That's not the goal of this. I want you to just notice it, take note of how you're feeling when you don't do these things, and just tuck that away. Okay? And just remember the impact it has on how you feel. Don't shit talk yourself. Don't blame yourself for feeling different because you didn't do these things. Don't tear yourself down for feeling different or showing up different on a certain day. Instead, use that as fuel to continue. So that was kind of my approach during this trip. I wasn't going into it saying, oh, you suck, you're awful, you feel shittier today than you would had you done A, B, and C. That's not the goal. Instead, what it made me think was, I feel really good when I do these things. When I go and check off all the things on my to-do list, I can recognize that it has a really big impact on how I feel and how I show up throughout the day. And because of that, I'm really excited to reintegrate them into my day-to-day routine when I go back home. So it adds this layer of excitement and enjoyment to what you're doing, because you are a little bit more mindful of how it's going to make you feel. So you get to look forward to how you're going to feel after you do those things, instead of just thinking, oh, I have to go back home and I have to start doing all of these things again and checking off all these lists, and oh, that's going to suck and that's going to be so much work. Instead, you can think, I'm going to feel so great when I do these things, and I know that, and I can feel the difference. So pay attention to that. When you are doing it, when you aren't doing it, just be mindful of the ways that it makes you feel. So my third piece of advice when it comes to maintaining habits long term is to be mindful of when other things are truly more important, and be willing to take a step back from and towards your habits when your life warrants it. We often think of maintaining habits as this all or nothing thing. You've either stuck to them or you haven't. You've kept the streak, you've never skipped a workout, you stuck to the meal plan, whatever it is. We often don't allow any space for breaks or time for us to take a step back from our habits. And it's certainly not something that we ever plan for. When we set habits and we plan on sustaining them over the long term, that looks like showing up every single day and doing it every single day, no matter what. And because we don't plan for these breaks and we don't allow ourselves the space to have them, when they do happen, it's typically because we have, quote unquote, fallen off the wagon in some way. And we use it as fuel to blame ourselves and shame ourselves, and we get stuck in these spirals of negative emotions and feeling like a failure, and it makes it feel too hard to pick these habits back up. Instead, what I want you to do is I want you to expect to step back and step forward into your habits as your life allows, and be willing to have those breaks when you need them. Planning for it ahead of time means that when you encounter that period in your life when it makes sense to step back, or you are forced to step back for a moment, it's not a failure. It's not something you blame yourself for. It's not something you tear yourself down for. It's something that you think, okay, I knew this was coming. In this particular season of my life, me focusing on this particular thing over my to-do list makes more sense. Maybe you've just had a baby. Maybe, like me, you've gone on vacation. Maybe you've just moved to a new city. Maybe there's been some other big life event where you have other things you need to focus on more, and it makes sense for you to let your habits take a little bit of a backseat for a while. And allowing yourself the space to step back from them without any shame and blame will make it a whole lot easier to step forward into them once you're in a place that will allow you to do so. So be ready for those kind of ebbs and flows and those step ins and those step backs, and let that be part of sustaining your habits. It's not about being 100% or being a failure. It's about allowing for those ebbs and flows and finding a way to make your habits work around your life. Planning for those ebbs and flows and those times when you're going to step back also allows you to consider how you're going to show up on the days where you can't check off your whole to-do list, and those times when you can't do all of those habits that you typically do. It'll give you that space to think, okay, if I can't show up in all of these ways that I'm typically used to doing, how can I show up a little bit differently? How can I still take steps to take care of myself without checking off this entire to-do list? And so for me during this trip, I knew that a lot of my habits were going to be kind of totally scrapped for this 2-week period. I prepared for that. I knew going into that was going to be the case, but I still wanted to be a little bit mindful of just my overall health and well-being. I didn't want to just, treat my body like a dumpster for 2 weeks because I'm on vacation. I still have to be a little bit mindful. And so some things I did to help with that included, making sure I'm drinking enough water throughout the day, or getting some sort of movement. In this case, it was a lot of walking and hiking, or doing a little bit of stretching in the morning before we went out. Those small things still allowed me to take care of myself in a way that would make me feel good without needing to check 100% of things off of a specific list and doing things 100% of the way that I typically do when I'm home. So the fourth thing is, don't be afraid to adjust and change your goals over time. We as humans are constantly evolving, we're constantly changing, our life circumstances are constantly in flow, and they're constantly changing, they're constantly moving. It makes sense that your habits and your goals are going to change with that. They don't need to be this fixed thing that you need to grind through and adapt your whole life around as your life circumstances change. Be willing to adapt your habits over time in order to fit in with the lifestyle that you have. Being willing to kind of shift and adjust over time is going to make it a lot easier to maintain. It's going to feel a lot more like a natural part of your day. And this can be temporary, so whether it's something like I've talked about where you have a big life circumstance or a temporary shift, or maybe you've just noticed that some of the habits that you've been doing for a really long time are not bringing you the same benefit that they used to. Or maybe during a period of time where you've stepped back from your habits, you've noticed that there's some things that may work a little bit better than what you're currently doing. Allowing yourself that space to be mindful of when things are working and when they're not, and when you're not getting the same kind of payoff that you used to from your old habits, makes it easier to just adapt as you go and create a routine that is really going to work for you. And it's not something that you are sticking to just because you said you're going to do it and you feel like you need to do it. Really be mindful of what the benefits are of you doing these actions, and be willing to plan for changes and adaptations as your life goes along. You're going to be much more successful long term if you do that, because your habits are going to be built in a way that works around what your life is. And it allows you to kind of give a little bit of thought to why you're doing the habits that you're doing. Similar to what we talked to before about being mindful about the ways that your habits make you feel and how you feel when you show up for them versus when you don't. I want you to take a similar mindset into this approach. So be mindful of what benefits you're getting out of doing a particular habit. If there's something that you do every single day, something that you have put the effort to put on your checklist and integrate into your day-to-day, why did you do it? What are the benefits of you doing that? How does it impact your day-to-day life and how you feel? And so be mindful of those things, and be mindful of maybe when those benefits are not what they used to be. Maybe in one season of your life, you having a particular habit made a lot of sense and made you feel really good. And maybe in another season of your life, it doesn't. And it's okay for you to recognize that and get rid of that habit and replace it with something else that's going to be more beneficial for you. You're allowed to adapt and change as you go. So the last piece of advice I have for you is don't tie your identity and your life's purpose to your goals. I think sometimes this is a common mistake that we make because we can put so much emphasis on habits and becoming the person that we want to be and doing all these habits to show up as that person, and that's wonderful. There's a lot of benefits to that kind of approach, but I think a lot of us take that a little bit too far, and we get into a place where we are tying our entire identity to our ability to check off our to-do list, or we are deeming our day as a success or a failure based on how many things we've checked off our to-do list and how many habits we've shown up and done. And we start to determine the quality of our life based on all these things that we have checked off a list. And that's not the point. Okay, now don't get me wrong. I love a good to-do list. Checking it off feels incredible. There's a lot of benefits to consistently showing up and checking things off a list. But don't put the weight of the world into filling it out. It does not get to determine the quality of your day. I want you to continue to make an effort to do those habits and check off those to-do lists, because that's great. There's a lot of benefit to that. But find other ways to make your day positive and find other ways to cultivate meaning to your day-to-day outside of just checking off a to-do list. Your whole identity and your value as a person and the value of your life and the quality of your day are not determined by how many habits you check off and how many things you do. I treat them as an add-on to your life. They're not the main event. They are things that are going to add to your life. There are things that are going to shape the person that you are, but they're not your whole identity, and they're not the whole purpose. And I want you to be willing to kind of separate those two and not put so much weight into checking things off 100% and hitting all of these things. Because when we put that much weight on what we're doing, it becomes this all or nothing approach. It creates a lot of shame and a lot of guilt in those moments where we maybe can't show up in the way that we want to. And it also doesn't allow for any sort of adaptability or flexibility, because if my whole identity and my whole life's purpose is checking off all of the things on this list, well then who am I when I don't do those things? If I have to go into some sort of circumstance that isn't going to allow me to do those things, where does my value come from? Where does my enjoyment of life come from? What's my purpose, right? All of these things start to get thrown up into the air, and it's so overwhelming to navigate in those moments when you've put all this weight on checking off this list. So understand the value, understand the benefits of you doing these things consistently, but look for meaning and look for value in places outside of it, because then on the days where maybe you do have to adapt and you do have to shift your approach, It's not going to ruin the quality of your day. It's not going to cause you to have some existential crisis because you didn't finish your habits the way that you wanted to. There's a lot of value to this life outside of you just checking off a list. Okay? So that's what I've got for you today. These are some approaches to thinking about your habits and approaching them in a way that I think is a little bit less rigid and a little bit more flexible than the typical advice that you hear about habits, but I think that's necessary. Maintaining habits over the long term is not an easy feat. It's a really hard thing to do, to integrate something new into your life and to make it stick over the long term. And so having these ways of thinking about it and being willing to adapt as you go and allow yourself the space to just be human and let your life weave around these habits and your habits weave around your life, instead of making it this thing that you need to do this one particular way every single time, is going to make it a whole lot easier for you to actually enjoy what you're doing and actually maintain these positive changes over the long term. So that's what I've got for you today. If you are still here, thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next episode.
If you like the show, don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a review, or share the show with a friend. Your support allows this show to reach even more amazing people just like you, and it means the absolute world to me. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll catch you next time at the Mindset Gym.